how to handle TPKs in Dungeons and Dragons or other tabletop games. This is widely universal. How to avoid them from happening in the first place and you don't even get close to it. How to address it when you feel like this is happening, that everyone's about to die. And also how to embrace a TPK once it already has happened and how you deal with that. And then there's resurrection systems or going on many adventures to get your souls back. I'm the dungeon coach. I'm here to help lower that DC in your game and give you some tips and tricks on how to be a better dungeon master. We're going to talk about TPKs. So first up, or should I say 0th up, is the first thing you should do is talk about this in session 0. Talk about character death. Some tables have it be all the way to the point where your character can't die unless you decide, yes, I agree. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's dungeon masters that are actively trying to get your character, and it'll happen multiple times. This changes depending on dungeon master, depending on group, depending on what campaign setting you're doing. Talk about what that looks like. Especially if there's new players in your group, I always in the session 0 talk about like how character death works. Talk about how you run death saving throws. I'll put a video down in the description for a bunch of different homebrew ways to handle death saves, because I think in general they're pretty lame. And anyway, that's not what this video is about though, is how do you handle death saves? They need to know, how does a character die and what does that process look like? Resurrection, how does resurrection work in your games? If someone did die early on, how would that look? So what I do as a dungeon master is I pull the curtain back a little bit and I kind of show what that process looks like for this specific campaign. Right now I am running Curse of Strahd, so I am definitely slanting more towards the more deadly side of things, and I did want to run this, and the players all agreed that we should run this a little bit, ratchet up the difficulty. So I was very clear with them at the beginning, is if you see Strahd, he could just kill you if he wanted to. If you say the wrong thing, he could kill you. If you get too cocky and you go pick a fight that you shouldn't, yeah, that might be a TPK right there. And unless you find an NPC that has some sort of resurrection magic, which there are some that exist in the world, I do share that with them in general, or the cleric gets a high enough level to where they can do it themselves, it's gonna be impossible to resurrect somebody, and if they do go down, then your character is dead. So for this example of mine, I told my players to make backup characters at the start. I've never done that before. This is the most intense or gritty game that I've ran for Curse of Strahd, and I told them to make backup characters to really get the point across of how deadly this thing is, and a TPK could totally happen, and they would all shift to their backup characters, and we'd have a really interesting, but we'll talk about how to do that at the end. And during that little spiel, I told them how I do death saving throws and how I do resurrection, and I talked about all those there. Comment and let me know if you want whole entire videos on these separate topics. The second part now is how to avoid a TPK when you see it coming off in the distance. I am not talking about when it's about to happen, oh my gosh, things are going really bad. That's the next part. I'm talking about whenever it hasn't happened yet, what can you do before to lay the groundwork to prepare your players, to give them warning flares and warning signs to not do it. It being walk themselves into a TPK. Because most TPKs, I'm going to go out on a limb here, I would say most TPKs that happen come from not knowing enough information, or they made decisions that they didn't know enough about. They didn't know that there was this many monsters here, or that this one monster was this dangerous. They didn't prepare enough beforehand, or they just keep making bad and misinformed decisions. So the 3 things I do, and an example, is warn them in game through NPCs. A lot of times is a really great way to do it, is to warn them inside the game with NPCs, talking to them about, beware of this crazy gnolls, they're vicious. Tell them a story through an NPC of how these gnolls ripped apart an adventuring party of 6 people. Meanwhile, their group's only 4 strong. And for this next part, it's a little bit more on Dungeon Master style as far as how you get this across, but you can also warn them out of game, because sometimes I stop and like, time out, because listen, these gnolls, they're crazy. They are known in the area to be wildly dangerous and vicious. Like, they attack targets and keep going until they bite their heads off. Asking around, anybody would know this because everyone's terrified of these things. And if you notice with subtle thing I just did there, as the dungeon master, I'm telling the players at the table, this is a very big dangerous warning thing, and then weaved in, characters would hear about this through whatever. And then there's things like reminders to be able to remind them in game or out of game of how dangerous certain things are. Sit back as a dungeon master, listen to your players, and if they start chit-chatting about going to fight this band of gnolls, oh no, my dungeon master spidey senses are tingling and I realize they're about to go into it, I might interject and be like, remember guys, I'm just throwing this out there as just so you know the stint of the game. There might be things out there in the world that are so dangerous that they would absolutely wipe the floor with all of you, and this is not some sort of video game where I only put in front of you the things that you can only handle, unless that is the kind of game you want, and talk about that in session 0. So yeah, listen to those players talk about their little plans and stuff, and try and warn them. Or not, if you want to sit back as a dungeon master and just be like, So my example is back to Curse of Strahd. They're going to the windmill, and spoiler free, the windmill has some dangerous stuff going on. So for my Curse of Strahd example, and again, spoiler free for Curse of Strahd, no worries there. And if you want to see my entire group, the home group that I play with, play Curse of Strahd, I have videos I put every single week up of our home games over on my Patreon. So you can see how this whole thing went down. But in general, they were about to go to a place that was very, very dangerous. And the danger, they knew something was off with this place. They knew that they had killed one of the 3 people, etc. And there was something was off with this place, and they knew it. Some of the players at the table had meta knowledge about the module in general, and then they didn't want to metagame it, and they did a great job of that. But I was very clear with their characters. You guys would know this is bad. Then there was the moment. They walk up to the spot, the point of no return. They're about to keep going, and they all had to start, guys, do we want to do this or not? They took a group vote, and it all came down to the wire. And before the vote went out, I said, I just want to let you guys know, like, you guys are entering into a very, very dangerous situation. Is it possible? You guys, you have the feeling of like, yeah, this is something we could take on. Would your character want to risk that? It's for big risk, big reward. If that's something they would do, go for it. But just know you are getting into a very, very dangerous situation. There's me telling them as the real life dungeon master. And then the cleric of the group did this. They cast the augury spell. If you're unfamiliar with the spell, you basically cast the spell and you get a wheel, woe, or some sort of neutral effect of like a good sign of something, a bad sign of something. And they cast this spell, and they asked about what would happen if they go this way. And now I get to in-game explain to them and really paint a picture of how bad this is. This was a fire cleric, and I told them, as you look into your hands and you see the flames, you look and you see yourself, and then you see yourself catching the flames erupt in your hand burns, you take 5 points of damage. They're like, wait, what? I just took damage? I said, you've never been damaged by your own deity. Your own flames just burned and damaged you. You look down at your hand, it's scarred and then slowly starts to heal, but you still feel the pain. Then I stopped and told them, mechanically, you can heal back those 5 hit points. I'm not trying to ding you 5 hit points, but that's just a little bit of what the augury spell would have looked like for you. That's me as a dungeon master warning them in game by hurting them with their own fire of how bad this thing is. So now there's all the prep you can do in session 0 and before they get into it. But now, what happens when the fight starts? Time out. This video is sponsored by the DC Playbook. Oh yeah, that's us. This month's PDF is all about TPKs and a huge, huge document of how to handle them. And it goes into a whole bunch of details that I can't even cram all into one video. This PDF is packed with tips and tricks on how to avoid and run and prepare and embrace TPKs. And it goes multiple steps farther after that with a full-blown resurrection system that's also different than the resurrection system I published in Alcanar's Almanac, which has a whole bunch of rules in there too. The resurrection system lets you be able to try and make your characters go through some stuff to be able to bring characters back. So it's not just this instant resurrection thing. Lingering effects from coming back from resurrection. And 3, this is the best part of the whole thing, 3 resurrection and mini adventures to be able to go on to be able to resurrect your allies. A character dies and it turns into an adventure that everyone else has to go on, including that character, to get them back. And there's even more where that came from. And we do this every single month over on Patreon and give Dungeon Master resources and tools to be able to enhance and plug into your games every single month. The PDF's available to patrons only during the month of September, and then the next month in October it goes over to the website. But anytime you're watching this video, the most updated link is always at the top of the description. Patreon is the #1 way to support this channel and what we do here and all the different endeavors we have, from videos, from PDFs, from DC20, the whole role-playing game that we're making, the whole thing. So I super appreciate the support. And speaking of support, let's go help those players not get TPK'd. So now you're in the fight and you know that things are going bad. They've chosen to pick that fight. For the record, my players did go and choose to pick that fight. But anyway, we'll talk about that later too. You're in the fight and things are getting bad. What do? Here are 3 different categories here. First thing are tweaks and adjustments on the fly to what you're doing. Now, this is a hot topic and this would be a whole thing. You don't want to fudge your rolls in this situation. That is one option for Dungeon Masters if they feel that that's okay with them, is to just like start lying about your rolls and then you're missing all the time. Players will catch on that. I'm sorry, they're gonna pick up on that, and then you've lost all street cred for as a Dungeon Master, and that is not worth it in my opinion. In general, the tweaks and adjustments you can make here are to the mechanics, not the roles. There might be a fight that you create as a Dungeon Master, especially if you homebrew everything as much as I do when it comes to monsters and encounters and all that kind of stuff. And you might have had some crazy ideas while you're making this super awesome encounter that's super fun and dynamic, but you messed it up. You overtuned it a bit too much. The monsters are hitting too hard. They have too much health. The players were a little bit low. Maybe you built the encounter to be a certain way, and then the players went and did a whole bunch of other stuff, and they're worn down, and they're not at the same spot that you were at, and you forgot to change the. Oh no! So yes. Tweak your mistakes. If you feel in your honest dungeon master heart that you've made a mistake here as a dungeon master and you've overtuned this in some way, and this is not it is not supposed to be this difficult, I have made a mistake. Yes, you tweak that. Now again, I don't tweak it through the rolls, because then you're just lying about your rolls, and then you've lost credibility. As you know, that's a whole nother can of worms. So here's an example. Early on in my dungeon mastering career, I did this exact thing. I had a big boss and I wanted to really make it a big boss. Yeah, this is great. So I had all these different homebrew stuff going on, had a really high armor class. That was what I wanted to feel. And this is before I realized that if you have a really, really high armor class, it feels kind of bad to fight because you never hit the thing, and that's not fun. So that's one lesson learned there. But during this fight, I was like, man, this is not going good. They can't hit this thing. This is bad. And I was like, you know what? What if? And I came up with this homebrew mechanic on the fly because I've realized the mistake I made as a dungeon master is has way too much armor class. This is not good. They're not going to be able to do this thing. It's getting really bad. So instantly came up with a homebrew mechanic to adjust for my mistake in making the thing. I added a new mechanic to it. Once it reached half health, it lost some of its armor. I described this cinematic situation where parts of its armor were falling off from this big blow that got it to that half health point. And now instead of an 18 armor class, it had a 14 armor class. And the players got really excited. Like, oh, we can do this. And then I was like, yeah, okay. And then as soon as it got to a quarter health, I had the armor class drop again. And this creature also had some ability that was tied to its armor that it would use based on its armor, that I then also said, this creature is now no longer able to use this ability. And they're like, yes, around the table. Oh, we got this, guys. That's what I'm talking about fixing your mistakes. If I had have done nothing, I would have TPK'd them for sure, and then, well, dang, that's a lesson learned. That's an expensive lesson learned at the cost of the players that I wasn't able to balance an encounter good enough. Now, the example I just gave is a very big example of this new mechanic that I'm introducing, but there's been times before also, simple times, where your players have been like rolling and they haven't hit the armor class yet, and you might have it be like, yeah, okay, it's a 16 armor class, and they've rolled like 17s and 18s and they don't really know, and they've rolled like 10s, and then you realize like, oh man, this maybe it's too bad, and things are getting really rough. On the piece of paper I have, it says 16 on the armor class, and man, I'm gonna overtune this. This isn't going good. A more subtle example would be a player's like, 14 to hit, and I'm like, exactly hits. And then you can change that on the fly. There we go. I said it. Am I a terrible dungeon master for that? I don't think so. And if you don't like that, then sure, don't do that. Keep that 16 and see what happens. But in my opinion, in the same way that before that fight started, I had certain information in front of me and I wanted the fight to be a certain way, and I was making up all this stuff in the first place. I homebrew all my monsters from scratch. I'm like, you know what? I think this will be a 16 armor class, and I maybe I didn't spend long enough thinking about it, and I just threw out a 16. I realize in the moment, in the fight, with everything in front of me, 14 actually does make more sense. So change it. Now, if you're running some sort of module and you want to pay respect to the module and run it a certain way for the sake of a module, I would say you could change that too. And that's up to you as a dungeon master, and no one will know the difference. But maybe for a little piece of redemption for people that are like, oh man, come on, what a weak dungeon master. I only fix my mistakes, not my players. If the fight's hard and it's getting bad and it's not looking good, and oh my gosh, this is getting real bad, and it's because I've made the encounter fine. I have the pulse check. I know what's going on. I have this estimation of how hard the fight's going to be. If they make a bunch of dumb decisions and they're reckless or goofy or just being weird and dumb out of nowhere for no reason, they have no tactics. They don't respect the monster at all. They don't respect the situation. They didn't think it out beforehand. If the players made a bunch of bad decisions to lead them in this situation and the fight's going real bad, worse than it probably should have, but it's their fault, I'm sorry. My hands are clean. That armor class is staying a 16. That boss's armor is staying intact. I'm not going to intervene and be like, oh no, I don't want to kill my players ever. Oh no. That's not it. It's things that are on me as a dungeon master that I made a mistake, and I'm like, oh, this is not good. I overtuned this. What do? That is where I intervene, because trust me, I have had a player point blank range where they were one hit from death, and I had a boss cast Disintegrate on them that would straight up kill them. And Disintegrate, for the record, their body evaporates into nothing. Like it's just done, right? And oh my gosh, that's what the character would have done. That's what the boss would have done. This is exactly how it was going to go. The boss had a vendetta against this person, and I'm doing it. Now, the players were able to stop that in that specific situation, but they know, and my players know, that I'm not going to be pulling any punches. So it's a careful line to walk, and I hope that the nuance of this conversation is kind of making your brain think about what you're going to do or what you would do as a dungeon master. Now, the second thing here during a fight is monster tactics and monster role play. If you are fighting a group of enemies and you are role playing them a certain way, or even tactically making decisions to them a certain way, you can very much swing the fight. A lot of times as a dungeon master, I am not myself as the human at the table trying to make tactically optimal every single thing. If that's what the characters would do, and that's what these NPCs would do, be super tactical, optimally optimize all the things, do combo moves together, pre-plan things, of course. And I've ran very tactical NPCs. Strahd, for example, would be a very highly intelligent, ruthless combatant if Strahd was trying to kill them and fight to the death. But if Strahd's just having a fun time, go, let us fight, and he's just toying around and playing with them, he's not going to be making tactical fight. My players at level 5 fought Strahd. Strahd could kill all of them. He was just toying around with them, playing around, seeing what they were capable of. At one point during the fight, I put my hand behind my back and I said, Strahd gives himself disadvantage on the rest of his attacks, and you see him put one arm behind his back. Because the point of that fight was not to kill them. And sometimes you might have enemies that are trying to feel out the players, or trying to maybe target one, or maybe they're just trying to kidnap somebody. Maybe they're trying to steal an item and get out of there, or maybe they're just dumb enemies and they don't have these highly tactical maneuvers. Why do I say all of this? Tactics can really swing a fight. I guarantee if there were certain fights that were evenly matched, if I were to really ratchet up my tactics and play out my mind like a chess champion or something, I'd be able to do a TPK. But if I played them like a bunch of idiots, they'd wipe the floor with me. And this just came into my head right here too. There's a lot of times too where if I have an NPC and I don't really know which option they would do, obviously the tactical one would be hit the person that's like really low on health and get them down. But then this person just like insulted me or just did something big or just hit me. And there's like reasons and motivations for NPCs to act in one of two ways. Myself as the dungeon master knows that attacking the person and knocking them unconscious is the more tactically optimal. But from a role play standpoint, it might make more sense to attack the person that just attacked me and insulted my mother. So as a dungeon master trying to avoid a TPK, you could just choose to do the tactically less optimal route and the more roleplay focused route. Or something I love to do is make a fate roll. This is a system I like to have. I just roll a d20 and I say 10 and higher, I'm going here, 9 and lower, I'm going there. I roll the d20 in front of the board and let fate decide. But I only do that in situations where both options would make sense for the character and the NPC to decide. And I just want to let the dice decide. And then also, side note, if the dice choose the nastier route and I go that and then they end up dying, it's the dice's fault. What if things are going real south into combat and one of the players walks up to a prison cell with a certain prisoner next to it and you stop everything as the bad guy, say, stay away from there. You now introduce some sort of role play reason that this person would now be at a disadvantage. The enemies have them exactly where they want. But now, wait a second. If they free this prisoner, what's going on here? Introducing little role play curveballs that might be able to swing the combat a little bit. Which leads me to the third thing of have different outs prepared. If you're unfamiliar with the term Deus Ex Machina, it's a term and I don't know where the history of it comes from. I'm gonna just show you this example from Jurassic World where the main character is about to get eaten by this Carnotaurus. Carnotaurus, fun fact, is my son's favorite dinosaur, and he talks about Carnotauruses every day. He's 3. So this Carnotaurus is squared off against the enemy. He's gonna eat the main character, and then out of nowhere, the Tyrannosaurus Rex comes and saves the day. Deus Ex Machina, something happens outside of the player's control and they get saved. Whether it be a good NPC sweeping in to save the day or a villain killing another bad guy, and then you're saved for that reason. Or the fight could turn into a chase scene of some kind where now you have to get away from this thing or then you die. Adding another little layer in there to where they could maybe get away. Now the big disclaimer I want to say right now here on this though is you don't want this to feel obvious or like a pity save by your players. And if you're like, I don't want to kill anybody, but this happens, that's going to feel real bad. So that only should happen if it makes sense and it was prepared or thought of maybe beforehand. Here's 2 examples. In my first homebrew campaign that I ever ran, the players early on stumbled upon some very highly powerful being that was posed as just an old man with a cane. Turns out this guy was a pseudo god and was able to do a lot of really powerful things they found out years later. It was a 3-year-long campaign. But I had a secret trap card in my back pocket where if any point in time a player was going to get to the point where they're just going to be straight up dead, I had this this secret reveal from this old man would have appeared out of nowhere, and it would have been the super big reveal for the plot and the story, and it would have advanced a whole bunch of other little plot lines, and I didn't know if that was going to happen or not. But myself as a new dungeon master, knowing that I'm full homebrew mode, I had a homebrew campaign, homebrew monsters, everything, I was just going wild. I implemented that trap card for myself to be able to play, and just in case, I'm like, okay, this was bad, and it also connected to the story, and it made sense, and it would have been a really big reveal that actually had some weight to it, and also had some cost, because if in the story this guy did reveal himself and save the day, he would have made himself known, and then all the bad villains would now know he's alive, and now everything changes. So yes, they would have been saved, but it comes with a cost. This ally of theirs is now exposed and vulnerable to all the other evil gods out there. And now more recent examples in that Curse of Strahd campaign, I knew that there was going to be a chance that my players were going to go down this path and go into this location and fight these people. So I had an entire thing set up in my Dungeon Master binder as TPK scenario, and it was a little drop down that it could open up is if they die. And it made sense for these witch type characters to want to keep them as prisoners. So during the fight, one thing I subtly described that I didn't end up having to go to, but I subtly described, as soon as somebody went unconscious and they started making death saves, some weird magic started to swirl out from this caster and swirl around them. This was magic keeping them there and keeping them sustained and alive, because these evil creatures wanted them to be alive. They wanted to keep them and capture them as prisoners. So if a character during this fight ever reached 3 death saves, I would describe something very different than them dying. I would describe something about like they're trapped in their own body or something. And then if that happened across the board to everybody, I would describe some sort of overall fade to black, and everybody would be kind of confused. And then I would describe them waking up inside of a cage. And that's your call as a dungeon master. If you put something wildly deadly in front of them to where they have no chance unless they perform high, like whenever my players went to fight this, if they performed 10 out of 10 optimally tactical and the dice went their favor and they didn't roll super terrible, they could have pulled it off, and that would have been epic and amazing, and all the players at the table knew that this was what they're getting into. Things were not going well, the tactics were kind of okay, and the dice were really not in their favor, and it was not going good. But I had in place something that made sense for these villains to want to do instead of kill them. Sometimes death is not the worst thing that could happen. So I had an entire scenario planned out and ready to go for this kidnap. And then what if some got kidnapped and some didn't? I had this whole thing prepared out and it would have been really cool. But I also just realized what actually happened was a form of Deus Ex Machina as well. So what actually happened in the story is, no spoilers once again, the bard who Strahd reached out to one-on-one, and all Strahd said was, I'm offering you powers and offering you magic if you want to take it or not. And then basically I offered for him to become a warlock patron in some way. It would have been free power with heavy strings attached, obviously. But this player was like, no, this would be a super bad idea. And me and that player talked in real life too, but they were like, man, I want to, but I know it's bad. I don't think I'm going to do it. But then in the middle of this fight against this insurmountable force, and it looked like things were going really, really bad, he called in the favor from Strahd. And in Deus Ex Machina fashion, Strahd came to literally save the day. And these creatures that they were fighting were terrified, obviously, of Strahd. So the players called Strahd in for them to handle the fight for them. It was a whole cinematic thing and a whole story lore thing. But it has consequences, because that bard that called in that favor to Strahd to come in and save the day, well, now that's his patron. And I can essentially possess that player at any time. And there's a whole bunch of things, but he's now starting to figure out ways to be able to undo that. But I go into that whole story, so I want you to take a big step back. I knew my player, I put something in front of them that was wildly deadly for them to be, that would be a TPK, but I set it up in a way that there was an interesting story-based scenario that made sense for the villains of some sort of kidnapping thing. Now the players didn't know this, and they go in there, they choose the fight anyway. It's going south, and a player calls in a pact of something that I had set in motion multiple sessions beforehand, of a sort of Deus Ex Machina situation where Strahd saves the day, but at a very steep cost. But the player's been working at it now, and he just now figured out a way to be able to break this pact. But that's another story. But now, part 4. What happens if it's unavoidable? You saw it coming, you tried to warn them, you waved all the warning flags, they're in the middle of the fight, you adjusted it, or maybe they just made bad decisions, but the dice have spoken, their choices have spoken, what you chose to put in front of them, everything's done. TPK. What are you going to do in this situation? And the part I'm talking about here is while the TPK is happening too. Like, there's a point where you know things are getting bad, but when that first person drops, and then maybe that second person drops, depending on how many players you have, you know it's coming. And there's going to be a feeling at the table. It could be a good feeling, it could be a bad feeling. And when I say good, there is such a thing as a good TPK. One that was like, man, we did everything we got, but it just didn't work out. Or man, we really, if I hadn't made this choice, those are good TPKs, and that's fine. Sometimes TPK is a absolutely good thing for a group to experience. Maybe they understand, like, okay, this Dungeon Master's not messing around. Maybe you get a little bit of street cred as a Dungeon Master for doing a TPK. I feel like I got some street cred the first time as a Dungeon Master I killed a player character. Now imagine the entire party, but there's going to be a feeling at the table, and you have to have a pulse check on that, if this is good or not, if they feel like it's unfair or not, if they feel sad or not, what's going on. And a lot of times you might want to stop and take a little time out, address it head on, and at a meta level outside of the game, be like, guys, this isn't looking good. You might need to shift your tone a little bit, maybe be a little more docile. It might feel real bad if you're like, haha, I got you, and it turns into this real cringy bad feeling. I know for myself, whenever things have gone south like this before, I roll and I start rolling everything out in front of the table, because I'm just like, oh my guys, this isn't good. Especially if I have a good feel at the table, which I do feel like I do, especially with players that I've played with multiple times before. I'm like, guys, this is going south. If this hits you, this might be it. How are you guys feeling? Y'all want to take a little break real quick? Maybe you want to ask them for a break. Maybe they need some time to gather their thoughts about how they can maybe do it. Maybe things are going, maybe they were just joking around and it was all kind of loosey-goosey, and then things get real. Guys, this is bad. Maybe we should take a break, take a quick bathroom break, grab a snack or something, and y'all should think about this, because this is going real bad. Or maybe the writing's on the wall and the players all kind of understand, and it's like this like ominous thing that's just happening, and there's this like kind of quiet stillness at the table that you just want to embrace and not mess with. Maybe start to describe things a little slower, a little bit more epic in these final moments, especially the player characters' final moments of their final swing with a sword or their final death saving throw. And that's a whole, I could really talk about this a lot, but when characters go down like that, give them some final words, give them some sort of last final moment to be able to kind of have this last flickering bit of consciousness to say or do something, see something in a vision. I don't know. Give them some sort of way to be able to interact and say some sort of final words as they send their character off, especially if it's going to be the last time. And then as the TPK keeps happening, player character after player character, and you get to the last one, that could just start to become a cinematic description. You know, instead of like, maybe you want to stop and be like, we all know what's happening here. How do you want this to play out? Or if you know the player wants to go to the last button, keep the rolls going, stay in combat, stay going, and they want to keep going, then you keep going. It is going to be a pulse check for you as a Dungeon Master and knowing your players. Myself as a Dungeon Master personally, as this is going to where the writing's on the wall and it's an obvious TPK and there's only 1 or 2 players left, I might say something simple. Guys, I think we all know where this is going, so I'm going to keep rolling it. I'm going to keep everything out in the open here. And if y'all want to kind of shift this into more of a narration situation and more of a cinematic final story bit, we can, but I'm going to keep rolling the dice here and keep going through here. Y'all just let me know. And then I keep in the combat, keep the rolls going until that final player character dies and describe that final moment. And now the TPK has happened. What do you do? Again, a lot of this is going to depend on your group, because it might be a very, very, very solemn thing, kind of how I've even been talking in this video, real chill and real mellow. Or it might be like, oh man, you messed it up, dude. Oh, we're gonna have to try it again. Okay, and you're gonna have to kind of feel out that whole situation. Different players are gonna respond differently. It's gonna be a whole bag of emotions you're gonna have to navigate as a Dungeon Master. But the one thing, regardless of any of that, is I would sit down with everybody and be like, all right, y'all, there's the TPK. Y'all did it. Here, this is where we're at now. You'll have 2 choices. Ooh, maybe now their attention's back in. Wait, what's going on? Do you guys want to end the campaign or keep going? And based on that choice is what we're gonna do next. And that's an interesting choice. We're gonna be able to talk about the table. Maybe that question breeds a little bit more of excitement. Like, wait, what else could happen? What could we go on here? And this is now almost like a session 0. We've circled all the way back to the session 0 vibes, where it's just people sitting at a table talking about what potential story or campaign you want to tell. If the choice is to keep going, what does that look like? Do you guys want to go down a path where you could possibly get your characters back? Does that make sense? Some campaigns that might not make any sense whatsoever. How the characters died might not make any sense whatsoever. Or maybe it does, and they were fighting a lich and they died to a lich and they now get reborn as their undead. Do you want to start an evil campaign? But do you as a Dungeon Master want to run an evil campaign? Only pitch out ideas that you obviously would want to do, but this is a time to talk at the table. what could this story look like now? Were you fighting an archdevil and now your souls are sent to hell and you have to fight your way back out? Do you all pass on to the afterlife, but you get intercepted by the Raven Queen, get intercepted by one of the cleric's gods? What do you guys want to do, right? And if it feels right at the table and that's what you guys want to do, then let that be a possibility. If you want to have some sort of, post facto Deus Ex Machina, where some sort of divine intervention comes in, some sort of, options, a window, a chance to keep telling the story with the same characters. Or maybe you tell the same story with different characters and you continue the campaign, but with different characters. In my Curse of Strahd campaign, if we had a TPK next session, then I already know all my player characters, backup characters would enter into the world. I would have a little moment as a dungeon master to have to think of how to bring them together, and they'd have to be almost like a little session 0 reset where the party assembles, right? And that'd be a whole bunch of mental gymnastics I'd have to do for that, especially if it's a full TPK. But does your party want to make new characters that are connected to your previous characters? Or are they now, this bad guy is now the new BBEG, whoever was the people that killed your character. And now they start over, but now the world's different. Their characters have gone through it. And then maybe it might be fun for you to play new characters to walk through the world your previous characters just went through. What changes there? You meet NPCs that you've already met as your other characters, but now it's different. That might sound exciting. So the choice to keep going could look a very, very different and many, many options, but talk about those. See what your players are excited about, see what you're excited about, or there's the other option. To end the campaign. And on a quick note there, if you do choose to end the campaign, please give them a campaign send-off. Yes, the individual characters, you want to give them their last final words, but if you ever have a TPK, I think it's really cool to give a campaign send-off. What does the world have? If you're not going to play this campaign any further, shift it into a shared dungeon mastery where everyone kind of talks about what happens in the world. How does this whole thing crash and burn? How does this, maybe there's a silver lining. Maybe somebody does save it. Maybe you even roll some dice and just get to simple kind of like the fate rolls that I was talking about, where you just roll high and lows and whatever and kind of see what kind of narration unfolds. Maybe there's an NPC that survived the final fight and they went back and they told others of this secret weakness that they just found out about the boss. And then they share the word with more adventurers, and they come together, multiple groups of adventurers come together to rise up and take out this BBEG. And it was because of the effort and the valiant lives that they put on the line of your own characters to find that out, and you paid with your lives. But you died heroes. And the story that you're able to unfold and start to kind of tell, the campaign's over, it's done. You can at least give it a little send-off so they can kind of have some closure on what that story looked like. It doesn't always have to be good. The story could end on a very, very bad note as well. And that's, again, going to be different based on your groups. And now the question is, which can shift into a little bit of excitement too, what do we do next? Do you want to play the same campaign again with new characters? Because that's technically an end and you're pressing the reset button. There's a difference between keep going with the current story and all these actions still have happened and make new characters in that same world, or a full, all right, the campaign's over and let's run the module again, run the campaign again, pick a different. Now, you know what? Instead of Curse Strut, let's do Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Oh, instead, we're going to do a whole homebrew adventure. Or you know what? We're going to switch modules. Instead of play D&D, we're going to play DC 20 RPG. That was a weird little segue there, because literally by the time this video goes out, the alpha for DC 20 RPG might be out there already as well. And there's a bunch of people that are talking about shifting over to that TTRPG. And if you're interested in that, I have a ton of videos on that. I'm going to be doing live streams on that stuff as well. But this is the exciting time where if something ends, maybe there could be a little bit of spark of excitement at the end of that TPK session, where now you're going to start talking about what are we going to play next. So I hope this rant about TPKs has helped, because this is a very important situation. And if this has helped you in any way, shape, or form, appreciate that. Like the video, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. It really does help out. I'm really trying to kind of spice things up with the channel right now, and that kind of helps to get things out there, to get these videos out there to help more people and more dungeon masters in this legitimately rough spot of a TPK, because we don't want anyone to be in the situation without being able to be prepared, because the bad TPKs, the ones that feel bad, that weren't earned, that feel unfair, that feel bad, that can really just mess with the group and be a bad taste in your mouth. But if you go about things the right way and you handle it good as a dungeon master, it could end on a really interesting note and tell a crazy story with a crazy ending where you'll all died valiantly, and then you're going to press the reset button, play again. So until next time, stay creative, think outside the box. Peace.